Pucks with Haggs
is brought to you by Prize Picks and the Game Time app.
Welcome to another edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, powered by Prize Picks, the exclusive daily fantasy partner of the CLNS Media Network. I believe this is the 120th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. I'm your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe to a premium membership and get all of my NHL and Bruins writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I write for the Boston Sports Journal, so you go to bostonsportsjournal.com, find my Bruins columns there 3 times a week, along with my Bruins Q&A, where I answer questions from Bruins fans and from readers. I will not have a guest this week. This is a solo mission mailbag episode where we're going to answer a few questions, Labor Day weekend edition. So as you can probably guess, not a ton of guests that wanted to do Labor Day weekend, which is totally cool. I understand that, but I'm here for you. I'm here to answer your Bruins questions. After we talk a little bit about the Bruins news, what happened this weekend, what developed this weekend, we finally got a training camp invite. A veteran player agreed to come to Bruins training camp. They made their choice as to the first player they wanted to invite. Remains to be seen if there's going to be somebody else. Last year, they invited Danton Heinen, and then they invited Alex Chasen. So they ended up having a couple of veterans that they invited to training camp to battle it out. Of course, Danton Heinen beat Chasen out for a spot and ended up having a really good year on a veteran minimum contract. So it really worked out. And then he got a 2-year deal or a multi-year deal. I think it was 2 years, maybe 3, from the Vancouver Canucks. So it really worked out for both parties in that instance. But this time around, it's Tyler Johnson, who is a really interesting choice. He's not the biggest guy in the world, 5'8", 180 pounds, speedy, skilled, super experienced. He's got over 700 games in the NHL with the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Chicago Blackhawks, was undrafted out of juniors, but really made a name for himself in the pros and proved that he should have been drafted. He's had some very good seasons, had 1 year where he had, I think it was 29 goals and over 70 points for the Tampa Bay Lightning. I think it was back when he was playing on the triplets line with Andre Palat and Nikita Kucherov. But a player that obviously has some talent. Clearly, you got to be a really good player to play 700 plus games in the NHL, but he also has over 100 plus games of playoff experience and 2 Stanley Cups on his resume. So you're talking about a guy that's a proven winner, that has that playoff experience, that brings leadership and that veteran presence to the table. And I think is versatile too. He's a right shot. Usually he plays center, but we've seen plenty of times with the Boston Bruins where they take a center and put him on the wing, because I think that's something you can very easily do with a guy that can play center. It's much harder to find a wing that can move over to center. You just load up on centers, and they're versatile enough to play the wing. And I think that's something the Bruins have done very often and will probably continue to do. But I like the signing as far as there's no strings attached. It's just an invite to camp. He's 34 years old. He's coming off like an okay season in Chicago. I think he had 17 goals and 31 points, I believe, in 67 games. He hasn't put up big numbers in the last few years. His last year over 20 goals was like 5 or 6 years ago. So you're not talking about a player that probably what he was 10 years ago. But you're still talking about a player that could provide a role for you and certainly provides insurance in case you can't find somebody that can play top 6 on the right side with Charlie Coyle and Brad Marchand, or you have a hard time finding a third line center if, let's say, Matt Patra is not quite ready for the NHL and needs some seasoning down in Providence, and will provide him some center competition for sure in training camp. So I think it makes sense from all angles involved. I believe when I wrote a while ago on Boston Sports Journal, like top 10 lists of training camp invites, I'm pretty sure Tyler Johnson was on that list. Because he was one of those guys that had a great resume that wasn't signed and is relatively still young at 34 years old. But I had him in there with guys like Kailer Yamamoto. Daniel Sprong was in there. Of course, he got signed by the Canucks. Blake Wheeler, Max Pacioretty, a bunch of players like that. So And some of those guys are still out there. So I think clearly this is a guy the Bruins valued a little bit more than maybe some of those other players. Maybe those other players aren't ready to come in on camp invites at this point, but you probably should be now that it's September. And I think for Tyler Johnson, it's a really smart move because the Bruins are probably one of the few NHL teams that's playoff caliber, that's good, that's going to have a very good team this year, that probably has a top 6 spot, winger spot potentially up for grabs, and potentially has something that veteran could come in and win the job. There aren't many teams as good as the Bruins that have the kind of outlook they have as far as the regular season and the postseason they're going to have, that would have a spot available like that. And maybe 2 spots. It could be top 6 wing. It could be top third line center. Depending on what happens at top 6 wing. If Morgan Geekie or Trent Frederick become your right winger with Charlie Coyle and Brad Marchand, then maybe that opens up a third line center spot. If, like I said, Patra's not ready for that job coming out of camp, and it just gives them insurance. I don't mean to be overly pessimistic about Matt Patra and his chances of winning a job. Just like he showed a ton last year as a teenager in the NHL, and I think he showed some very good offensive upside. Clearly, he's got good skill. And good playmaking ability, and the way he thinks the game creatively is excellent. But I saw diminishing returns of what he was doing as sort of the league caught on to who he was and how he plays. And I thought skating wise, he had a hard time sort of, showing he had any kind of explosiveness. And I think that is something he needs to work on. I think enduring the physicality is something that he needs to work on. Not getting gun shy with his play with the puck and creating things offensively is something he needs to work on, and continuing to sort of stay aggressive and assertive. I thought his effectiveness kind of wore down, even though the numbers were pretty good at the end of it for a young player going through it for the first time. I felt like his numbers sort of like petered out and wore down as the time went on. And that tells me that maybe he needs some time in the AHL before he's going to be a consistent producer at the NHL level. And maybe he needs, a little development time before he can come up and be like what would probably be a David Krejci type player. Not the fastest guy in the world, not the most explosive skater, but creative, could change gears, could control tempo, was a great guy setting other people up, was excellent with the puck on his stick, and really made players around him better. I think Matt Patra can be all of those things. I just think asking him to do it right away might be a lot. It might not. He might come out in training camp and look excellent and, look like he did last year and win the job and no looking back. And maybe last year's experience has just made him a better player. But given what I saw over the course of the season and the fact that he didn't really dominate at the World Juniors, that kind of told me something too, that he was okay, but he wasn't great. I wondered if his confidence was not at the highest point it had been, and if he had gotten beaten down a little bit by the NHL, which happens with young guys. There's no, you don't learn about the NHL and how to endure it and play through it until you've experienced it for a time. But all of that is a long way of saying that, I do think you have to have an insurance policy if Patra's not ready, and not ready to, let's face it, if you're going to be a top 9 center in the NHL, you've got to be on your game all the time, and you've got to be really ready to go. They have to have an insurance policy in case they decide he needs to go down to Providence, and they should have somebody else there that can potentially play third line center. So I think it's smart all around. It gives you a veteran guy that could work on the wing with your veteran players. If guys like Fabian Lysell, Georgi Merkulov, Morgan Geekie, Trent Frederick, maybe Max Jones, Justin Brazeau, if all those guys get auditions and they don't look great, I think Tyler Johnson's another guy you could throw in there, and he could potentially play really well with Charlie Coyle and Brad Marchand because he's played with high-end players like that before and produced, and he's shown he can do it. And I think in some ways, to be honest with you, I think there would be a preference, especially from Brad Marchand, to have a veteran guy that they're playing with, to have a guy that thinks the game like they do, to have a guy that's going to be consistent, to have a guy that's going to play at both ends, that, to have a guy that's, got big game experience, has been around the block a bunch of times, really thinks the game well. I think they want all that stuff. And I think, all things being equal, they might prefer that, for a guy on their wing. So I think all that's going to be interesting, but I think it's a really good, it was a good acquisition as far as securing him for training camp. It'll be interesting to watch him compete with everybody else for a job. And I think he's got a really good chance to potentially push his way in there if he plays really well in training camp. So that'll be interesting. So let's move on to the questions here. This is from B Bruins 88 on Twitter. Tyler Johnson should bring for more internal competition, center and right wing. Do you feel this move indicates some type of effect or movement in the Jeremy Swayman negotiations? And the easy, very quick answer to this question is it has zero impact whatsoever on Jeremy Swayman, on the negotiations, on anything involving Jeremy Swayman. Jeremy Swayman is a whole different kettle of fish as that negotiation goes on. You couldn't afford to sign a player to an NHL contract right now because of the Jeremy Swayman negotiations, because you want to have cost certainty with Jeremy Swayman before you move on to anybody else. But you can bring in a player on a veteran training camp invite, and it has nothing to do with Swayman, and it has no impact on the salary cap until you sign him. There's no financial obligation by the Bruins whatsoever when it comes to a PTO, which is a player tryout, which is what you give to a veteran to come into training camp to try and win a job. They are under no obligation to pay anything whatsoever. The only time they start paying, and it goes on the cap, is if they sign the player, if they like the player, and if he wins a job. So it's a no cost, no risk, potential high reward kind of thing. The Bruins aren't committing anything as far as money, as far as salary cap space, as far as anything for a veteran tryout for Tyler Johnson. They're basically just inviting this guy in to maybe win a job. And it's, in this day and age with the salary cap where the middle class of the NHL, the veteran middle class, is kind of getting pushed out because of all the massive contracts that are out there. Like, this is something that's become more and more prevalent, more and more important, I'd say, over the last 5+ years than it was beforehand. There was a time when you never saw these kind of like established players having to kind of sing for their supper with veteran tryouts in training camps with NHL teams. There were times you didn't see that a lot in the past, but it's something you see quite a bit now. You see players and you're saying, wow, that guy has to go into camp and doesn't have a contract. And Tyler Johnson would be that kind of guy. Max Pacioretty would absolutely be that kind of guy. I know he's had injury problems, and I've heard him linked to the Toronto Maple Leafs. It'll be interesting to see if that's where he ends up going. But he's another guy that, at this point kind of has to earn it. And isn't getting a contract. And same with Blake Wheeler. Kailer Yamamoto, a former first-round pick that put up decent numbers at times with the Edmonton Oilers, is in the same boat as well. And, it was surprising if Daniel Sprong was going to have that as well. It was understandable that he eventually got signed, but it was amazing that he was out there at all after the first rush of July 1st NHL free agents, because he's been a consistent offense producer throughout his career. Yes, his defense is a little suspect, and that's part of the problem, I think, and part of the issues with him where you put him in the lineup. But he's been a very consistent offensive player, and you pay for those guys because it's the hardest thing to do in the NHL is put up points. But the bottom line is there's a lot more guys now that are on training camp agreements that have to come into camp and win jobs veteran-wise than there used to be, just because of the way the salary cap is now. And this was the prediction when the new CBA came out, is the veteran middle class of the NHL was going to get totally wiped out. The guys that were getting paid $2 to $3 million that were in their 30s, that were depth players, third and fourth line guys, essentially at this point, were going to get wiped off the board as far as being consistent NHL established players with contracts. And, that's what we're seeing happen a lot. You're seeing a lot of young players that are cheap and on entry-level deals getting pushed into jobs. And you're seeing a lot of veteran players that now have to pay for the minimum, NHL veteran minimum, which is about $775K, after they win jobs in training camp, or, just playing on a 1-year, $1 million contract like Kevin Shattenkirk and James Van Riemsdyk and Milan Lucic and some of the guys last year that the Bruins signed when they were in cap trouble. That's a direct impact of the CBA. And the fact that you're seeing now the top 2 or 3 players on every NHL team getting the vast majority of the money, and then they have to backfill with all these cheaper players on cheap contracts in order to keep them around. And keep veterans in the mix when otherwise you might put rookies that are, salary cap friendly in those spots instead. So bottom line, Tyler Johnson has nothing to do with Jeremy Swayman. They're not going to sign him until they sign Jeremy Swayman and they know what he's going to cost and they have cost certainty there. And that could factor in whether they have the wherewithal to sign him at all. And if they have the money to sign him to a contract, could depend on how the Jeremy Swayman negotiations end up going. But like right now, the training camp invite, the veteran invite has nothing to do with Jerry Swain. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America and the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than in 2 to 6 player stat projections and you watch the winnings roll right in. Right now, you can take advantage of Caitlin Clark racking up triple doubles and dropping dimes in every game she's playing, or hop on the Jaron Duran train as he's posting big offensive numbers in just about every statistical category imaginable. One Caleb Williams passing yard gets you 1 win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard gets you an automatic win every football weekend in September. 4 weeks of free W's. Don't miss the deal on Prize Picks because it's gone when September ends. You can now win up to 100 times your money on Prize Picks with as little as 4 correct picks. Download the Prize Picks app today and use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on Prize Picks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, Roger Perry from the Facebook fan group. I'm curious about your thoughts on the Bruins goaltending for this season. Assuming they sign Swayman before camp, the team will have 3 goalies under contract, 2 of them for multiple years. Is there any scenario in which you think the Bruins would keep all 3 on the active roster? I wonder if the Bruins are hoping to coach up Eunice Corpus Solo and highlight him during the exhibition season in the hopes of flipping him to another team and getting at least $2 million of his $3 million salary off the books. Your thoughts on netminders for this season? Thank you, Roger Perry. Look, Bruins fantasy would be to be able to flip Corpus Solo in training camp and have somebody absorb most of the money that he's going to cost. They would love if that were to happen. That is not going to happen. There is not somebody out there that I think is going to take Corpus Solo based on what he looks like in training camp and take a couple million off the Bruins books in order to trade for him and trade something else. I think that's a reasonable scenario if Corpus Solo comes back, has a good year for the Bruins, and shows around the league that he's, he could be a good backup. He could be a good potential number 1 in the right situation, or 1A if you have a 1B, maybe a veteran 1A to a young 1B. But it's going to take a while for him to establish that after the, just bogus year he had in Ottawa. It's going to take more than training camp to show that, to prove that to people. And he's going to have to do that over the course of a year with really good work, with performance, with being an excellent backup to Jeremy Swayman, if that's what happens. And I think he has the ability to do that. He's shown that in the past. You put him on a good team, he's been good. He was just on a not great Ottawa team last year that had a lot of defensive deficiencies. And I think that he couldn't be brilliant and save them. But I'm not sure he's that type of goalie. But I think he's a goalie that I think with a good team can be fine and has, been pretty good even on bad teams in his past. The guys got over 300 games of NHL experience. Or close to it anyway. You don't get to that point unless you're a good goaltender. But I think there's also a scenario where Corpus Solo could start the year in Providence. And we talked about this, I think, was Mark Diver, who definitely, backed up this theory. You could see Brandon Bussey come and be the backup early in the year to avoid putting him through waivers to see if he can do the job, put Corpus Solo in Providence, kind of bury him there, and then see how it goes. And if Bussey struggles, then you may be able to get him through waivers if he does have to go down and bring up Corpus Solo. And then you could have him in Providence without, losing him after giving him a shot. And then have Corpus Solo up where you're getting at least more bang for your buck and upping his value as far as how he's playing. That's how it could play out. It's all going to depend, though, on how they play in training camp. If Brandon Bussi is lights out in training camp and Jeremy Swayman shows he's ready to be a number one, which he should, and Corpus Solo, let's say, struggles a little bit or is just okay. Let's say he's fine. Not great, but just like fine. Stops what he's supposed to stop, like isn't allowing bad leaky goals, like whatever. That's when I think you could see Bussi potentially start the year with Swayman and Corpus Solo start in Providence, and then the Bruins will figure it out based on how guys perform once the season starts. But I think they view Brandon Bussi, the Bruins do, as an asset that they do not want to lose. Could that mean that they start all three with them on the roster as well? I suppose that could happen. I don't know that they're going to do that, but they could if they value Bussi enough that they don't want to lose him. And if Corpus Solo plays really, really well in training camp, maybe that's what you do in order to keep all three until the situation kind of resolves itself a little bit. But like I said, if you're doing it because you want to with the end game that you want to trade Corpus Solo and eventually Bussi and Swayman will be your goalies, I don't think that's happening in training camp. I don't think that's happening even early in the season. I think it's going to take a good body of performance from Corpus Solo to eventually allow you to trade Swayman. I just think trade Corpus Solo. I think you're going to have to see, close to a full season, or maybe it's the trade deadline, right? Maybe you could spin him off at the deadline if he has a good, 2/3 of the season, and you have a team that needs goaltending. That's a possibility as well. But I think you're going to need the bulk of the regular season and to see Corpus Solo play really well and perform really well before you're going to see him potentially get dealt and the Bruins shed some of that salary cap that they signed on for when they made the Linus Ullmark trade. I just think that's the way. I think it's too fast to think that that's going to happen in camp and somebody's just going to take Corpus Solo off your hands. That's a little too easy and a little too clean. I think teams are going to need to see more out of Joonas Corpus Solo coming off a horrendous year in Ottawa before they're willing to do that. So my thoughts are, could be Corpus Solo and Swayman if Bussi doesn't look like he's ready. Could very well be Swayman and Bussi with Corpus Solo and Providence if they are worried they're going to lose Bussi on waivers, which I think they could if they try to get him through at the beginning of the year. Could also be Corpus Solo, Bussi, because Bussi's on a pretty low salary cap deal. Could also be Corpus Solo, Bussi, and Swayman, depending on how much Swayman signs for, if they want to carry all three because they were worried about losing Bussi as well. But I don't see that being a sustainable long-term thing. I don't think they can do that for a long period of time. That would have to be something they were doing because they had another resolution coming up the pipe, or, they did somehow have a trade in the works, which I just don't see happening. But those are my thoughts. Like, the bottom line is Swayman's going to play the bulk of the games here, and you're talking about either Bussi or Corpus Solo playing 20 to 25 games. I think Jeremy Swayman needs to play 55 to 65 games if he's going to be paid like $8 million a year. He needs to be able to shoulder that kind of workload to be paid like that, and he should want to do that anyway, and I think he does. I think he wants the puck, wants the net as much as they're going to give it to him. Performance-wise, you're not talking about a ton they're going to be asking out of either one of those guys. But I think it's more asset management, and it's more not wanting to lose Bussi for potentially nothing. And that becomes a real concern. And something you really worry about is that he could become a real good goalie somewhere else. And you don't want to lose that for nothing. And I think he's in a spot, and Swayman's in a spot where sooner than later, he could come in and be a backup to Swayman, and it could be a really good situation where they're pushing each other. But Corpus Solo right now gives them a great veteran sort of insurance policy where they have some leverage if Swayman holds out, if Bussi's not ready, like they haven't somebody else they can rely on that's got a proven track record. So like it's not going to be a complete gong show if Swayman's not there to start the year and the worst case scenario plays out, which again, I don't see happening, but Corpus Solo is there. because the Bruins know that the quickest way to submarine your season for an NHL team is to have bad goaltending, and they can't afford that. So they need to have a guy like Corpus Solo in case, the worst case contingencies came to be. Looking for concert tickets for the rest of this summer, early fall. Last year, I used Game Time to get tickets to Def Leppard, Poison, Motley Crue, and Joan Jett at Fenway Park. And you can go out and get Fenway Park concert tickets this summer and this fall with Game Time. Pearl Jam's coming in September. I believe Post Malone is also coming to Fenway Park in September. So why not use Game Time to get your tickets for those concerts, in addition to the football action that you're going to have that's just starting up as well, that you can use Game Time to get Patriots tickets or any tickets to either NFL or college football all around. So it's fantastic using Game Time right now, taking the guesswork out of buying concert tickets with Game Time. You can have all-in pricing, which is the feature shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, you can get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee, which is my favorite, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, again, but create an account and redeem the code CLNS for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right. Tell us something about Swayman. Also, when does camp start? Training camp starts for the Bruins, I believe it's September 18th, September 17th, somewhere in mid-September. I'd have to look. The first day is always like medicals, physical fitness testing, like pull-ups, which, Zdeno Chara's, asserting his authority every year by doing a zillion pull-ups. Rookie camp will start about a week before that. It's, September 10th, 11th, something like that. Captain's practices will begin next week in earnest. I'm sure they've been skating together, most of these guys, for a while now anyway. But that's when the wheels will start going. It feels to me like training camp starts later and later every year. And they, they jump right into the preseason schedule within a couple of days. It all happens really fast. Tell you something about Swayman. The only thing I can tell you about Swayman is relax. Like, training camp is like a month away. Fans are getting really anxious and nervous. Could be getting nervous about nothing. I think at this point, like, there's no rush for either side. They're staring each other down and staring down the barrel of the gun kind of thing. And like, they're not, they're in a little bit of a stand down right now, and it's going to be like that until training camp gets close. And I think that's when potentially you could see something get done. It's going to be interesting to see where it comes and see what happens, because, I don't think they're particularly close. As I've said before, I don't think this is an easy negotiation, but I do think eventually the Bruins are probably going to have to move at least a little bit towards Swayman and his camp. To get him in. But I think there's also going to have to be like some understanding from Jeremy Swayman and his people that, like, whatever comparables he thinks he has, I don't think are comparables. At least in my mind. Even Ilya Sorokin, like, not a comparable. Like, not even, no. Like, he hasn't played anywhere close to the amount of games, which is huge for a goalie. He's never played more than 44 games in a season. Like, that is a huge part of the comparable thing when you're looking goalie to goalie in the NHL. And also, like, just being one of the best players at your position, like, all that stuff. Yeah, they might have the same save percentage, but, like, you're playing in a much different role if you're basically sharing and splitting time with another goalie instead of actually being the number one guy with all the responsibility and everything else going on. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But, for my mind, I think it's not time to get nervous until training camp gets going. All right. One more here. Happy Labor Day weekend, Joe. Happy Labor Day weekend, everybody out there, for sure. Diehard puckheads talking hockey with Patriots getting ready to start and Red Sox in the midst of their August swoon. Devastating to hear that the Gaudreau brothers were both killed by a drunk driver when they were out training on their bikes. My heart breaks for their families, as it does for mine. I think that's just a tragic, senseless tragedy, and the more you hear the details, the more it just rips your heart out, and you feel so bad for friends, for their family, for Boston College, Columbus Blue Jackets, Calgary Flames families. Like, it's just awful, and there's no way around it. And it's heartening and great to see the hockey community, as they always do, comes together in these times of tragedy. But like, there's just a hole and a void there for the Gaudreau families that's going to be there forever, having lost those two brothers in such a tragedy. All right. And he goes on to say, any word on any of the new guys and whether they have been skating locally, any of the young guys looking significantly better, bigger, stronger, faster. Cannot wait for the Dread Sox to be done and the Bruins to be dominating Nesson's airwaves. And that's Mike from Stoneham. And that was on the BSJ, the Boston Sports Journal Q&A. I have not been to Warrior, so I have not seen any of the younger guys since development camp. Fabian Lysell was not there, which I kind of would like to have seen him there, especially with this being such a big training camp for him, but he wasn't. So I have not seen a lot of the young guys, and there weren't a ton of young guys at development camp that are going to be threatening for jobs right now. So there wasn't much to judge right there. We will be seeing that coming up with rookie camp, and I think that will be a really good indicator of who's potentially ready, of who looks good, of who's made gains. Obviously, Matt Patra talked about gaining 10 pounds when we saw him at development camp. I think that was the best news, or the best thing that you saw, is he's a little bigger now and a little stronger. But for him, he needs that, and naturally he's going to develop that as he gets a little bit older. But what I really want to see with him is just a little bit more in the explosive skating department, and a little bit more speed and explosive movement, and a little more sort of the power skating thing into his game. And I don't think he's ever going to be, the best, fastest skater out there. I think he's very much in the David Krejci mold when it comes to that. He's going to be good enough to get the job done and to get where he needs to go. But I think that's something that you saw as time went on at the NHL level this season that he needed to work on and get better at. So he's the only guy I really had any read on whatsoever at development camp. And it was good. He looked fine. He looked healthy. He looked good. Again, I wouldn't say he was dominant like you would hope to see a guy like that, but he was also coming off shoulder surgery and rehab. So I'm not going to read a ton into that. But we'll see how he does in training camp. But I wish I had more to give you, Mike, as far as that stuff goes. But Patra's the only one I really saw, and we'll get a better idea when we drop in and see rookie camp, which should be happening about a week, 10 days from now that we're in September and hockey season is here. At all levels, youth hockey, college hockey getting going, pro hockey, best time of year. So glad it's September now. Couldn't wait for this. But happy Labor Day weekend to you. Happy Labor Day weekend to everybody else. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. Have a safe rest of your Labor Day weekend. Let's get a good start to the hockey season this next week. All you youth coaches that are getting on the ice with your teams, all you club hockey teams, all you players that are getting ready for high school and starting your skills and stuff this week. Everybody have a great week with hockey back. It's the most exciting and best time of year. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the rink.